in order to have a smart city, you need to have smart citizens. It's not about the technology. That was very much a first generation view. Increasingly, we're seeing smart and resilient cities that are about citizen co-creation and enabling citizens to be more proactive in the way that they shape cities. It was this four-sphere approach that I obviously learned at Cambridge and adapted even more, seeing how we can really get to grips with good quality stakeholder engagement across civil society, state, academia, and industry, working collaboratively together to create this net zero prototype, which was built, which was then the platform for the developer to scale and create greener, leaner, cleaner townships. It became a book that got published. It turned into a TV show. It influenced the first Green Mark residential rating as a green design tool used by other developers and architects. And ultimately, it gave everybody a platform, everybody within the four spheres of influence, a buy-in to be better.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to On Call with Insignia, where we go on call with leaders innovating the future of Southeast Asia's and other emerging markets, internet and digital economy, and other forms of innovation, or as we like to call it, ASEAN innovation. I'm your host, Paulo Aquino, and we are back with a mini-series, a series of episodes that we're doing as our education arm, Insignia Ventures Academy, has recently launched this partnership with the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership to run their business and sustainability program in Singapore, the Asia seminar of it, at least this coming October. In the lead up to that, really my pleasure to have a couple of not just the alumni, but also faculty of the program. So for those who are interested in learning more, you don't only get to read about the program on the website, but actually get to hear from the people who actually have run the program over the last few years and have also gone through it. So in this first episode for this mini-series, we have with us a fellow and also a faculty of the BSP, or the Business and Sustainability Program. He's none other than Jason Pomeroy. So Jason, just a quick intro on him. He's the founding principal of Pomeroy Studio and the creator of Pomeroy Academy as well, which is one of the only sustainability scholarships for Southeast Asian built environment professionals to study at Cambridge, where he himself was educated and got his own slant into sustainability, which we'll also talk about in this episode. He's pretty prolific in terms of writing about built environments, or sustainable urbanism and all of that. Has written 5 books on the topic, has hosted a couple of TV series, which we just talked about off the record. And he holds professorships as well at Nottingham and James Cook University. He's also teaching as well at Cambridge with CISL's IDB Master's Program. And I'm really excited to talk to him, not just about his experiences, but also his views on the future of built environment, sustainable urbanism, and also some of the technology that he's working, as I understand it. Pomeroy also has its own technology arm as well, which we'll get to in a bit. But first of all, welcome, Jason. Thanks for being on a call with us.
Paolo, an absolute pleasure to be here.
Where are you calling from today?
Good question. Today, I'm actually in Singapore. I just flew in from Kuala Lumpur this morning.
Right.
Soon to be off to Bangkok. So it's good to be on home turf, so to speak.
A little bit more, comfortable space from which to share your experiences. To kick things off, your journey into kind of sustainability leadership started out with architecture. You went to the Canterbury School of Architecture and then Cambridge for your master's. Maybe you can share with us how you came across CISL in particular and how that really took your architecture education and your profession and your approach to it to the next level, so to speak.
That's a really good question, Paolo. Thanks. You know, when you have this itch that needs to be scratched, the architectural journey that I took at the Canterbury School of Architecture that prepared me with the tools to be an architect, to be able to design, would only take me so far. And when you're in practice, you then often run into the same situations where it is often perceived that the architect is doing a particular role, and the services engineer is doing a particular role, and the structural engineer is doing a particular role, the cost consultant doing a particular role. And ultimately, in this day and age of trying to break down the silos and trying to create more integrated systems thinking across all of these different professions to try and get better outcomes, this was the itch that needed to be scratched. And so when it came to systems thinking in the built environment, breaking down the silos to create more of an interdisciplinary understanding of trying to work collaboratively with the view for a sustainable process to deliver a sustainable product. I went on my search, and ultimately the search led me to CISL. And back in the day when it was called the IDBE program, the Interdisciplinary Design for the Built Environment program, which is now called the Sustainability Leadership for the Built Environment program, purely because it has become this vehicle to really create thought-provoking leadership to influence the built environment industry. It was an awakening. And ultimately, going to do this particular CISL course and get a master's degree in this subject matter to really start asking the key questions in order to break down the barriers, to be more collaborative, to think about the system of systems and the processes to deliver more sustainable products. This was then the catapult for my onward journey, not just with Cambridge, but within my profession, establishing my businesses and hopefully being a force for good today.
Yeah. And I think it's really taken your approach from just doing for the sake of doing to really thinking about why we're doing certain things, why we're making certain choices, why do we have the processes that we have.
Absolutely, Paulo. I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's the question, why? Why bother? Why do it? Why are we going through the business as usual when we could actually be innovating and finding solutions that will actually transform businesses or transform products or transform processes? And ultimately, is that level of inquisition that I think CISL programs often are able to tease out, coax and cajole cohorts and students. And ultimately, it's a lovely Cambridge sort of saying, quiet down your cleverness, be able to actually ask the right questions at the right time and not be scared of asking questions and being inquisitive. That was an incredibly valuable quality that we pick up in the Cambridge journey. And dare I say it, that as you get older, you realize how little and how much more you need to be able to know. And that is something that we all get when we go through the Cambridge experience.
I really appreciate that mindset. I think we tend, especially for folks who are very much experts in their fields, there's this tendency to think first before listening. But then again, that mindset really can spark a lot of conversation and reflection on why we're doing certain things. And I think that's really translated well into your business, in particular Pomeroy Studio, where I think one of the descriptors that caught my eye is that it's really interdisciplinary. So really taking from your Cambridge education, would love for you to share how that's worked in practice in terms of pulling in different expertise and different fields to work together.
Absolutely. I think that when you then end up in a lecture theatre with not just another bunch of architects holding the black pen, I think all of a sudden you realize that sustainability and sustainability leadership means different things to different people in their different sectors and different disciplines. So rubbing shoulders with a barrister at law who specializes in construction, through to policymakers, through to developers, through to financiers, through to then the built environment professions of engineering, architecture. It made me realize that the only way we can get to the truth, the fact and reason of good quality sustainable design is through an interdisciplinary thinking. That's what made me want to create Pomeroy Studio as a vehicle for master planning, landscape design, architecture, interior design, graphic design, branding, and all underpinned by fact and reason. That's Pomeroy Academy, sustainability research in the fields of vertical urban theory, net zero homes, modular construction, digital twins, the role of culture and conservation in society. And ultimately, the bedrock of the Academy and its courses and events and social outreach, knowledge that we can get from this can then feed into the studio. And that ultimately allowed the studio to be a very purpose-driven, evidence-based design studio that was not about the whims and wills of a designer holding a black pen, but it's based on fact and reason. And The work that we do then feeds back into the academy. The academy also provides then a platform for our thought leadership, whether that's through broadcast media, book publications, so on and so forth, and then created the technology company as well. But that's
Right.
another story.
Yeah, so I guess it's really a virtuous cycle that you've created from the studio to the academy and even the technology side as well. Given the amount of evidence, data, and from their insights that your organization or your businesses have gathered over the years since you've been running Pomeroy, what have you learned about Southeast Asia in particular? You mentioned at the top of our conversation, you're traveling around from day to day. What have you learned in terms of Southeast Asia's built environments? And for our audience watching or listening in, maybe to ground, we've been talking a lot about high level processing and things like that, maybe to ground their visualization of what you guys do in terms of sustainable design.
Where there's a will, there's a way. And I think that there is this appetite in Asia to be able to be slightly more entrepreneurial within the realms of slightly more flexible policies. And I think that there is a fundamental difference between the way that things are done in the global north and the global south. I do find that there is greater tolerance for new ideas and innovations in Asia, which allows us to get systems and products with a speed to market. And I think that there is an inbuilt inclination in some regions, like in Thailand, like in the Philippines, where new ideas that are innovating designs that are low in consumption, whether it's energy consumption, water consumption, or material resources. There is this natural inclination to want to do this anyway. There's not a government in place to say you've got to be doing X, Y, and Z. There is this natural aptitude for being lean, clean, and green culturally. And so that is a perfect platform for us to be able to innovate in this region.
I'm glad you brought that up, that inclination for these kinds of solutions, right? And maybe you can share some examples. You mentioned Thailand, and I'm calling from Manila. So you can share a Philippines example as well of how that's played out.
I'll give you one classic example, actually from Malaysia, and it was a very small test bed. I had the privilege and pleasure of designing the first zero carbon house in Asia called the Idea House. And when you look at the fact that the housing market is constantly under the stress and strain globally of needing to create more affordable housing outcomes for an increasingly growing global population, this sat very uncomfortably in Malaysia, and with record levels of waste, record population increase, that there was this need and desire to create a new sustainable product. So we were approached to create this R&D prototype, and this net zero home that would generate as much clean energy as the family could consume would then be the benchmark for the developer to go and scale these residential developments into townships, but also be a force for good and an influencer to the housing market of Malaysia. But we knew that it wasn't just going to be the will of one architect holding a black pen. Engaged with civil society groups to say, what do you want from your Malaysian home? What does a Malaysian home look like? We engaged with industry players, in particular the supply chain, to say, what is it that makes a sustainable home more sustainable, and what products go in there? So it could be a platform for the supply chain to also market their new innovations and new products. We went to the state to say, how are you going to be a force for good to use this R&D prototype to change policy, to influence green rating tools to create better, more resilient residential homes in the future? And we then went to academia to say, how can we record all of this? How can this be documented as papers or books that can then go back into academia or even to civil society and influence a broader audience? And so ultimately it was this 4-sphere approach that I obviously learned at Cambridge and adapted even more, seeing how we can really get to grips with good quality stakeholder engagement across civil society, state, academia, and industry, working collaboratively together to create this net zero prototype, which was built, which was then the platform for the developer to scale and create greener, leaner, cleaner townships. It became a book. It turned into a TV show. It influenced the first Green Mark residential rating as a green design tool used by other developers and architects. And ultimately, it gave everybody a platform, everybody within the four spheres of influence, a buy-in to be better. And ultimately, this is the model that we've applied in Indonesia, in the Philippines. Ultimately, we look at every single project, not just as a commercial vehicle. It is also a vehicle that can be a force for good across those four spheres of influence.
And I guess thinking even longer term, right? Like, how then do you grapple with the challenges of, I guess, making sustainability sustainable? Making sure whatever you started, is it something that you continue to monitor, for example, as in the Malaysia case?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the book was the vehicle for us to go do post-occupancy analysis. We continued the line of development with that particular developer. But just by virtue of looking over the garden fence, other developers were looking over the garden fence and seeing what this particular developer was doing. And they were saying, I want some of that. I want to innovate. I want to also have first mover advantage in my territory. And so
the FOMO
that
effect is
allowed us
real.
to scale. Exactly.
Yeah.
That allowed us to basically then go into the Philippines, go into Indonesia. And I remember when I was doing one tour, I was in Sweden, totally different climate. You're looking at a cold to temperate climate zone. And they were saying, we've seen your buildings. Can you do the same in Sweden? And we were basically saying the buildings will not look white. They will not be reflecting the heat away. They will not have lots of lush green sky courts and sky gardens. They will need to be locking in the warmth in the winter time and be open. But what was wonderful is that they understood our process, the four spheres of influence, engaging with those key stakeholders, looking at sustainability, going beyond the triple bottom line of social, economic, and environmental principles, to also think about space, culture, and technology as equally important design parameters. They understood our DNA of collaboration across those six pillars. And they said, we know that whatever you design will have your DNA and it will suit in Sweden. And sure enough, the candy factory project in Sweden doesn't look like it's in the tropics. It looks like it's part and parcel of the DNA of what Sweden should be about, and has become an incredibly successful story. And ultimately, if you get the method of thinking right, the process, get the sustainable process right in order to then get the sustainable product, irrespective of place, people, climate, and culture, it will work.
And you mentioned with the Sweden case, you were educating, sharing your methodology, and they were able to apply it within their own context, within their own culture, and leveraging the technology that they have available. And so with Academy as well, like, how have you seen the talent pool, the professional pool around built environments evolve ever since you started the Academy and the studio?
It's a wonderful growth journey. What started out from the humble learnings from what I gained in Cambridge to then setting up in Asia, expanding from Singapore regionally, and slowly but surely growing the portfolio into the Middle East and in Europe. But ultimately, the core mission of the Academy was to translate the research that we were doing within the built environment industry across our building projects into academic lectures and courses that could be undertaken in partnership with leading institutions like Cambridge, like King Saud University, like Yardley, like James Cook, like Nottingham, and effectively being the linchpin between academia and industry. Ultimately, it's those two spheres of influence, academia and industry, and also then engaging with state policymakers and NGOs to enrich the academic programs that we were creating. And so even the academic programs that we still shape always seek to reach out to a very broad portfolio of policymakers, academics, NGO leaders, industry captains to enrich the programs. And if they can also help influence within their networks, it allows us to then expand our footprint, which has allowed us to then work with the British government on creating the ASEAN Sustainability Leadership in Infrastructure Program. And that in itself was in partnership with CISL. So where there is a will, there is a way. The future of education is not just purely within the realms of an academic institution. It does have to engage with other spheres of influence, not too dissimilar to your good selves.
And speaking of other dimensions of sustainable design, technology is certainly a large part of it. And in particular, you have a focus on digital twins. Maybe for our audience is not as familiar, maybe you can get started with defining that and then move on to where that applies into your work.
Absolutely. Yeah. A digital twin is a digital replica of the physical world. And we should be no strangers to digital twins in different industries. If we take, for instance, NASA creating one of the early digital twins for the Apollo space mission, you wouldn't send an astronaut into space without doing a few trials first and a few simulations in real time as to what the impact would be on the astronaut in space and also the return mission to Earth. You wouldn't run complex heart surgery if you also hadn't done a few tests beforehand. You wouldn't roll a car off a production line if you hadn't done a few simulations. So imagine a digital twin. It doesn't have to be the built environment industry, but it could be anything, which is basically a virtual three-dimensional digital replica in real time. So in particular for the built environment, we do look at spatial models of cities as a three-dimensional digital replica. We've taken the digital twin model one step further to not just think about the spatial data of what the confines of a room is or the lighting or whatever. We also think about the other data pillars. So in addition to spatial, just like our 6 pillars, there's the social pillar of data, the cultural pillar of data, the environmental data, technological and economic. And so you can then start to create a platform for data with our 6 pillars. And ultimately, I was doing a show many moons ago for Channel News Asia called Smart Cities. And the Singapore episode was actually talking about digital twins. We had the privilege and pleasure of the Secretary of State for Slovakia returning home on his plane, clearly bored on the plane and flicking through the channels. And sure enough, my ugly face showed up on the TV monitor talking about digital twins. And he went back and he spoke to his team. And we were eventually, through a tender process, appointed by the Slovak government to create the digital twin strategy for Slovakia. And ultimately, digital twins can be a force for good, because if you can be measuring in real time the impact of your decisions, you can then shape, hone, and monitor the outcomes of your interventions in the built environment. Gone are the days that we can hold, once again, the black pen, you do the design, you build it, you install the sensors into the city, only to then realize that you are sensing too late. A sense that you've installed happened, you sense, you realize that you got the park in the wrong place, you got the socket in the wrong place within your bedroom, and you realize that you need to then undo. And that's going to be costly, it's going to be resource intensive. So digital twins allow you to test in real time scenarios before it becomes physical reality.
Earlier, we talked about like ratings for built environments, and there's obviously also certifications and compliance elements to it. But then if you have a whole layer that's already smart enough to absorb or collect data even on a city level, then I would presume it makes things a lot easier for people to buy in and actually implement.
It comes down to then the quality of the data and what is the common data platform that allows you to be using the data wisely. There is a saying, too much information is bad information. Sometimes we can see that, are you using the right data at the right time? And is it being accessed by the right people to achieve better outcomes? So I do think that within this realm of big data and its application to digital twins, there are, should I say, data gateways, data portals. How far do you open that door to allow for the right data to come in? Who uses that data and to what efficiency will that be used? And ultimately, if we imagine big data being a force for good, then the question comes up is how do you then use artificial intelligence to process that data to provide different scenarios and outcomes? I think we're still at the cusp of seeing AI as a very young child that still needs to be nurtured by responsible parents. The problem comes when we're not very responsible. And so I do think that this is still a very early point in the AI's journey. I think we still need the sentient mind of a designer, of a policymaker to be able to be the responsible adult in order to then shape better built environment outcomes.
The smart city is not really a new thing, right? You mentioned the show that you were doing a few years back. I'm curious to know what are the challenges ahead for what's the next step for smart cities to really get to that next level from just, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are aware now of these initiatives and all that, but what's the missing piece?
That's a good question. I think that the words smart, sustainable, resilient seem to be so interchangeable and become quite hackneyed. And it's funny, I was doing a Channel News Asia interview last week, and the word AI seems to somehow just replace the word big data. So all of the questions that I was looking at, I'm thinking is, does AI help shape cities? 5 years ago, the same question would have been, does big data help shape cities, or do digital twins help shape big cities? So I do find that we can be quite whimsical when it comes to using these terms. Let's go back to your question about smart cities. And I think that in order to have a smart city, you need to have smart citizens. It's not about the technology. That was very much a first generation view. Increasingly, we're seeing smart and resilient cities that are about citizen co-creation and enabling citizens to be more proactive in the way that they shape cities. So how do you engage with 7-year-old children all the way through to 70-year-old grandparents in the use of technology to be a force for good? How do you mobilize them through apps or digital platforms that allows them to contribute? I remember the former mayor of Bandung, a gentleman called Ridwan Kamil, who was absolutely brilliant at mobilizing 1.5 million people, his constituents, to basically come together and share their views on the city. He basically said, come, tweet me, Facebook me, communicate with me, tell me what's wrong with the city. And sure enough, through a digital platform that he set up, algorithms sifted through all of these trending topics of congestion, crime, pollution. And ultimately, he was able to assign his resources wisely, listening to them and applying those lessons to actually solve those key challenges, as opposed to just throwing resources ad hoc to try and hope and pray that something can get fixed. So the ability to engage with citizens, co-creation, mobilizing people, mobilizing the senses and creating smart citizens is far more important than the technology itself. And that's the direction that we're starting to see smart and resilient cities. The generation 3 is all about the 4 spheres of influence coming together, being mobilized to actually help shape the city bottom up as opposed to top down. It's not just about the government anymore. It's equally about industry, civil society, having great impact, verified by academe to say, this is a good idea, this is going to be good for the city.
My next question is going to be about how do you align, really incentivize people, right? Because I think at the end of the day, it boils down to what is motivating leaders or people to do the right thing. And I think you answer that as well. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that because incentivization can be actually quite tongue-in-cheek and quite fun. If I was to think about how in Amsterdam they had a trial project where there was free Wi-Fi, but the free Wi-Fi in the streets would cut out if the pollution levels in the air would reach a certain amount. So you've got people all of a sudden saying, hold on a second, my Wi-Fi has just disappeared. Why? Oh, it's because there are higher levels of pollution right now. And so it forces everybody to do the right thing. And I think that's quite a genius move.
Yeah, it reminds me of the book Nudge and a lot of these experiments that they talk about small things that can really shift the way people behave. I'm curious, going back to Pomeroy technology, I'm curious, as somebody who works at a VC and works with startups, I'm curious to know what kinds of startups are you interested in working with? What kind of technologies in particular, apart from big data, digital twins, any other kind of technologies that has been top of mind for you these days? Yeah.
It's interesting. I think it's the third time I'm raising my black pen because I'm still quite analog in the way that I go about things. Black pen, love to sketch, love making models in 3D printers and whatever. But I do think that we are within a realm where we've shifted in the design process from the analog to the digital. And so part and parcel of the journey for the creation of Pomeroy technology was actually born out of the digital twin research that we did and the digital twin consultancy for governments like Slovakia and Oman and Saudi Arabia. What we thought was really interesting was the process of being able to create large packages of drawings for high-rise structures or large airport terminals or so on and so forth. There are reams and reams of drawings that need to be created to allow for contractors to do what they need to do, build the thing. So what were the shortcuts that could be deployed that would actually save on time and resource? When we think about BIM, building information modeling, and particular platforms like Revit, these are great digital tools that allow us to create more effectively packages of drawings that integrate across architecture, engineering, cost consultancy, so on and so forth. A common digital platform, a drawing suite, a drawing package that allows us to effectively deliver the sustainable product, the city, the building, the landscape, whatever. But even within those, you've got the boring and the mundane details of creating those window schedules, the door schedules, repetitive tasks that can take so long. And ultimately, what we wanted to do was automate that process. So Pomeroy technology took those areas that were repetitive and could be automated to really help architects and designers save time and resource. And so ultimately, the platform that we created, Pomeroy technology, is actually creating these fast track procedures that are common plugins to standard automated procedures to save time and resource. What would have taken teams of people can be done by one individual. What was in weeks can be done now in hours. And so ultimately, that element of automation will hopefully allow us to be even more effective, not within our own studio, but being able to share that product with other architects, engineers, contractors, and developers in the marketplace.
I think it's something that we're seeing even with AI, as a lot of AI labs have generally developed their own LLMs, is that definitely, especially in Southeast Asia, the rise of very vertical, industry-specific kind of models. And obviously, there's an advantage for somebody to build that as they come from their own industry, know what matters to the stakeholders in that industry and what kind of data is important, what processes are repetitive and could be automated. And so we see that across a lot of, just having a podcast a while ago about somebody doing that in banking and in financial institutions. And now here, you guys are doing it also for BIMs and the different processes that like architects like yourself would have to go through, right? And previously take a lot of time to do. And so, yeah, circling back to, we started with CISL, your journey with CISL. We went through how you have applied that to your work today at the Pomeroy, let me just say Pomeroy Group, a group of businesses that you run. And then now going back to CISL, and you've been a faculty for the BSP, and you continue to give back to CISL through various programs and partnerships that you've mentioned earlier. What excites you about what CISL is doing today from ever since you first encountered them back when you were in the UK?
That's a really great question, Paulo. I think what CISL does, it does empower the individual to be a force for good, to be able to influence either internally within an organization or externally to a whole industry or a sector. For me, I remember taking my master's from Cambridge and actually then going on to do a PhD afterwards. And that PhD then became a book, and then it became a TV series, and so on and so forth. The ability to influence externally through something that started internally as a personal mission. That's what I think CISL is very good at, and being able to effectively craft the individual with the basic skills and know how to look across the spheres of influence, to influence internally, to not be scared to ask the right questions with confidence, and effectively then go and externally influence. When I then think about how CISL is doing this on a global platform, I think that's also really quite interesting, because Cambridge is an over 800-year-old institution that has a remarkable research reputation, and the ability for them to make those partnerships, both in terms of other academic institutions, but also with industry partners that are global and have a reputation, I think is similarly fascinating and interesting and most enriching. So my journey continues both back in Cambridge through the SLBE program, the Sustainability Leadership for the Built Environment program. And I'm happy to take the learnings that I've had through Cambridge and also through the industry and bring it back into a program, a master's program in Cambridge, but also through BSP, also through bespoke programs. When I think about the BSP as a platform for true business transformation, that's where I also think that CISL are incredibly successful, because it is the confidence to be able to challenge preconceived ideas and the business as usual, to actually start thinking more broadly about how there can be greater purpose-driven impact within a sector and within a discipline, and being confident enough to stand up and say, I know this is a lonely journey. I may be the only chief sustainability officer in this organization. I know that it's a long, lonely road sometimes, but I will be able to influence. I have the fact and reason. I have a network supporting me. And in this endeavor, I will be able to achieve. And so I think that is also something that is part and parcel of the Cambridge process, to be able to deliver that sense of confidence in the individual, knowing too well that it is on a bedrock foundation of fact and reason.
For those who are listening or watching and want to speak more with Jason, I think the best way is to check out the program. He'll definitely be there as a faculty. I think it's a great opportunity to not only get to meet folks like Jason who are really building their own businesses that are not just there for commercial kind of objectives, but also really impacting societies as well. You teed up the future episodes talking about and their quote unquote lonely journeys. We'll see how lonely it is or how they do to adapt to that. But excited to have more alumni in the rest of the episodes. But yeah, any last words for our audience, Jason, with regards to BSP, but even we have a lot of founders also that tune in and maybe they're really focused on building their companies, building technology. But again, with your experience of really thinking more broadly about how you impact society.
I guess for me in my journey, I think it's always come back to identifying what my weakness was. And there are many weaknesses. I can be, as somebody with ADHD, it was very important for me to have structure in my life. And so the ability to establish in my head the 4 spheres of influence that would always be able to provide a framework of stakeholder engagement and having multiple parties coming together to influence for good. That was one frame. The 6 pillars, going beyond the triple bottom line, to think about space, culture, and technology as challenges, but also then opportunities for us to really shape better outcomes across our businesses. That was another frame. And the third frame for me to actually process all of this was what I would call 3 Ds: distill, design, and disseminate. The ability to distill lessons from the past. And there have been some remarkable people who have done this before. I am simply, to borrow from some Cambridge quotes, because I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, the ability to distill lessons and facts and reason from the past in order to be able to then design for the present. And then the ability to use the lessons learned from those designs today to disseminate for future generations. That dissemination being, whether it's through the buildings that we create, or the papers, or the books, or the TV, to share a greener message. then I would say that I have done my job. And ultimately, if I can do that to influence and scale my business operations, then I will likely think that I'm being a force for good.
That was definitely a teaser, and I think impactful in terms of really going down to first principles, thinking about the frameworks that you use from day to day. And yeah, thank you again, Jason, for joining us on call. And looking forward to working more closely with you in the next few months as we head on to the BSP in Singapore and later this October.
Indeed. Paulo, many thanks. Really appreciated the session.
Awesome.